to everyone. This is Kathy Tilke with the Gilbert Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to Guiding Growth Conversations with Community Leaders. This is our first of a series of calls in partnership with the Gilbert Chamber and the town's Economic Development Department. I'd like to recognize my partner on this call, Mr. Dan Henderson, the Director of Economic Development Office. Dan, welcome. Thanks for your partnership.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Glad to be here with you.
Thanks. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of housekeeping on how to ask questions. So you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, we have, there's a Q&A option. So please use this option to submit questions during the presentation. And you may also raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question yourself. So Sarah's going to be helping us keep an eye on those raising the hands and any chats that are going on. And then Dan is going to be watching for your questions. And so while we have some pre-selected questions to ask the chief today, we're also going to want to make sure that we hear from you. And so Dan's going to make sure that we monitor that okay, and we'll be asking your questions as well. So welcome again, and I want to welcome Chief Mike Soelberg. And Mike's been chief here since June of 2017, and I had the honor and the privilege of serving on his interview panel and was very, very supportive of Mike coming to Gilbert and being our chief. And probably, I know you have many years of excellent service. I don't have your whole bio in front of me, but what I want to share with everybody that I found very unique about you is Mike is very engaged in our community, and he takes the time to get to know people. He's involved in social services. He's out there spending your own money. I know you're at these events. You're helping to raise funds and awareness for those that are raising funds for the less fortunate in our community. And thank you for that. That's not something that we always see from the chief of police, and we really appreciate that. And we've had great chiefs, don't get me wrong, but this is a little different and unique. And I know I've served on your police community advisory board that Mike encourages your officers and your employees to be connected to the community, to be reaching out and doing a lot of listening as we go through just everyday life, but even in these times, even more so. So I appreciate that, and welcome.
Thank you.
So let's go ahead and get started right away. We're in very uncertain times. I mean, you just start out with COVID-19, and then you examine the death of George Floyd and what a devastating effect it's had on people across the nation and the world. And what we found is people are scared, they want to create change, and they're looking for leadership to bring about peaceful solutions. So while Minneapolis may seem so far away, the heartbreak is still felt right here in Gilbert. And Chief, I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what the town of Gilbert is doing to bring the community together to have these conversations.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to everyone and let you know a little bit about what the Gilbert Police Department's doing, the town's doing, and how you can help us and increase the dialogue and the conversation within the community. As Kathy mentioned, we've had a long history of being engaged with the community, not only at the chief's level, but throughout the department and the town. And so it's one of those things that you can't take it for granted. Even if things are well in your community, you've got to be paying attention to what's going on in your community, in your businesses, within the government, and watching trends and issues throughout the country and the world. Whether it's COVID or whether it's a tragic death, such as we saw with George Floyd, that has really changed the world again, unfortunately, on another police-involved incident of excessive force and resulting in the death, and obviously the death of a young black male. And so we, as a department and as a town, have to reflect and look for ways to improve not only our department, but our town and as a state as a whole, of looking for opportunities to reach out to communities and listen for new ideas. So, so far, we'll get a few questions that we've talked about that we'll talk in a little bit later is what our ongoing efforts are. But since the tragic death of George Floyd, we have had a large expanded upon our community, our Chiefs Community Forum, and people who have reached out to myself and the mayor over the last 2-3 weeks. We had a listening session where we invited those groups. There's roughly around 50 or so that attended that first meeting, and listening to issues and concerns that they have in the community. And then we wanted to make sure that we're giving everyone the opportunity to be heard. And so we've had listening sessions. Last Thursday at the Gilbert Community Center was the first one. We had another one last night, and then we're scheduled for another one tomorrow night. And so there's still some openings. If you or anyone else you know are interested in participating in those, due to COVID, we've given the option to do this remotely, or you can come in person. And these listening spaces, they're designed for us to listen. We're obviously answering questions that people may have, but it's designed to get ideas, listen to stories, listen to concerns, good and bad. Some are personal stories that have happened to individuals, they've happened to their families, or they may be anecdotal of, I heard this, or I'm afraid of this happening here. And so we're gathering as much information as we can, gathering ideas, listening to different perspectives, looking for ways that we can improve. And so it's important to note that obviously the focus is on police. Anytime something like this happens, the focus is on the police department, and understandably so. We have the ability to take someone's life or take someone into custody. And so there's a higher standard for us, and we understand that, and we understand that getting into this profession. And so that's why we got to make sure we don't make mistakes, and we're doing everything we can to do it the right way. So with our listening spaces and all of our information, there will be more to come for opportunities on a small scale and a larger scale of listening to our community members, making sure our nonprofits, our businesses, everyone's represented. And then also we're in constant communication with our neighbors throughout the East Valley and the county and the state, and watching what's going on nationally as well. We're going to see a lot of legislation locally in the state and national that is designed. The intent obviously is to improve not only relations, but also the way we operate as a police department and as the oversight, and making sure that we're doing things the right way, being transparent, and making sure that when mistakes happen, that they're appropriately dealt with. So there's a lot of opportunities that we've experienced in the past, and we will continue to do that in the future. And we will make sure we'll get that information out to you when those opportunities come. We're trying not to overwhelm everybody with a long list of agendas and schedules. We're still obviously very aware of what's going on with COVID and the increases we're unfortunately seeing, which obviously has impacted our businesses tremendously. And so watching, it's been a crazy year. And so doing everything we can to be in communication with the community about what's going on, how you can help, and what's to come.
Great, thanks. And I believe if any of the participants want to go to the town's website, there is, I think, an icon for listening space, which will continue to be populated as more opportunities come forward.
Yep. Continue to watch that, and as we add additional events, we'll continue to add those there. Some may be, as I mentioned, specific to either nonprofits or religious or business, to where we will more than likely reach out to you. But then also we'll have the open public forum and meetings as well that'll be available.
Perfect. I'm going to go off script for just a moment, Chief, if it's okay. As I mentioned, serving on your community advisory group, I've been in meetings where we've talked about recruiting and we've talked about training and these types of things. And I don't know if people really understand that then we have a lot of people interested in becoming a police officer in Gilbert, but there is rigorous standards that are put into place beyond just the physical, but the psychological and a lot of the training. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Roughly, we hire about 1% of those who apply. We have very basic, actually, requirements to be a police officer. You have to have a GED or a high school diploma and be 21 years old at the time of becoming a police officer. There is no age limit. We encourage everyone to apply that's eligible. The majority of our standards are based on Arizona police officer standards and training certification standards, which some are dictated by statute, some are dictated by the rules that they have created. And so it is possible for someone to have a criminal background and still be hired. It obviously depends on what that crime was. There are, if it's a felony, it's pretty much a no. There are some rare occasions though, if it was a long time ago and if it was expunged so it's not a definite no, but for the most part it's a no. But based on that background check, so when you apply and you go through the written examination, you do a physical fitness test, which consists of a 1.5 mile run, push-ups and sit-ups. And then from there, you would go to a written interview. And after that written interview, if you pass all that, and at each one of those phases, just in reviewing backgrounds alone, or not backgrounds, but the applications, we lose about 50% of the applicants. So we normally average between 300 to 500 applications every quarter that we open our hiring and recruiting process. And so by the time we get down to the end to where we're actually doing background investigations on our people, it's usually 100 people or less out of those 400 to 500. We lose about half each time. And so once you get past the interview phase and we get into the background, we lose, once again, well over half of those people. And that can be anything from once we get into the history, we can see in the beginning what you were convicted of and what check boxes you marked on there, from everything from drug use to criminal activity, and even petty offenses and underage drinking. That's not going to exclude you. But what we're looking for when we look at someone's background is how long ago was it? How many times did you do it? If it's something that, you drive drunk all the time, but you just haven't been arrested and you've been doing that, you stopped a year ago, we're going to want to see a longer history of you not committing crimes that are going to imperil the safety of our community. So we have specific guidelines from the state, and then each department has additional guidelines that may or may not be more restrictive than what the state. We can't be more lax than the state, but we can be more restrictive than the state. But for the most part, the majority of our agencies, including us, are pretty much right in step with the state standards. And those are all available online as well if you're curious as to what those are. And those standards change as 20 years ago, it was much more restrictive than what it is now. The hard drugs, so to speak, LSD, and hallucinogens are still prohibited, but there is a limited amount of cocaine use, methamphetamine use that's allowed. Obviously, once again, we're looking for a separation of, depending on the drug, 5 to 7 years at the least. Plus, there's a number of times that it's allowed. If you exceed that amount, then you're not allowed in. So it's a very stringent process. It's difficult, and that is part of the recruiting and hiring concerns that makes it difficult, for someone to want to do this job, especially in times like this where you've got some animosity towards law enforcement, and trying to attract someone. Hey, we get paid well. I can tell you that, especially compared to other states. And so it does have a good retirement system, and it's a rewarding job. And people get into it not for the money, but they want to make a difference. But also they want to make sure that they're safe and that we're training our people. So our hiring process, we want to weed out those who don't have the right mindset. So we do have to go to a psychologist and do about 6 hours of testing, the MMPI and a bunch of other psychological tests to look for traits and trends that may not, that indicate that someone may not be a good suit for handling, anger management and stressful situations. And so that plus the polygraph and the medical examination are all different steps we go through to make sure that someone's prepared to do this job, because it's not easy, and we want to make sure that we're getting the right people in there. But that's I'll hit. I don't know if it's on the list of questions, but I'll hit it right away. I've always said it, and it's just obviously more important now. The diversity of our department. The bluntness of it's a very white male department. Now, law enforcement in general has traditionally been in that same mold. We do have a good representation of female officers. We have roughly 30 police officers that are female. I would love to see more of that. But on the minority side, we currently only have 2 African-American employees, 1 civilian and 1 sworn. We've had more, they've come and gone, but that is obviously an emphasis for us. And even for our Hispanic community, I would love to see a lot more. We're actually doing pretty good on Asian ethnicity, but I would love to see more. The more diverse our officers are and our professional staff, the better we are to make connections and understand. It doesn't make someone a better employee than the other, but we want quality candidates and quality employees. And we do our best using social media, using career fairs, the colleges and the military to do our recruiting. So we are looking for different ways to do some outreach, but our best recruiting tool is word of mouth. So as business owners, nonprofit members, if you know someone or you know someone who knows someone who's interested, whether they're in school or getting out of the military or just looking for a change, please encourage them to apply to us, because that's our best resource. Is people better than anybody else, and if you think they'd be a good fit for us, please refer them to us.
Great, thanks, Chief. And I know that you've been reaching out into those communities and even doing very, very small recruiting opportunities, even if it's just attending one of their churches to meet a lot of youth that might have interest in the future. So we appreciate that your community is still reaching out to others, and I think as a community as a whole, we are thankful that it's a very stringent process and that you're focused on the best officers for our community.
Yeah. And that continues beyond the hiring process. You're under a microscope for, I used to say 20 years, but now retirement's 25 plus. So, and that's really, we get into it knowing that you are constantly going to be questioned but we understand that there's a high threshold of trust that's put upon us. And so we expect people to watch our videos, read our reports, and find any fault in that, whether it's to try to get out of a traffic ticket or whether it's criminal, or if we're doing something wrong, to make sure that we correct that so we don't have a situation where, bad performance and lack of oversight breeds misconduct. And so we do an excellent job of investigating all complaints. The majority of our complaints are actually internally based. We obviously take complaints from the outside, either through phone, in person, or online, and we investigate those as well. But the majority of our complaints are internal, and the majority of those are actually sustained. Because if when we see someone did something wrong, we initiate a complaint to make sure we correct it. And sometimes there's some justified reasons for what we're seeing, but the majority of the complaints we do internally, they're sustained because we know what the policy is, and we're seeing that they're not following policy. But it's a very controlled and restricted environment, which that's why, with the military, we focus on that industry, because that's how they come up through the military as well. And so it's a good transition. But we also got to make sure that everyone's prepared for that transition from military to civilian life, because it's a different job.
It is, for sure. Thank you. So we've been blessed in Gilbert that many, and I'm going to call them marches, because I think there's a difference between a march and a protest. And I don't know officially if there is, but in my mind there is.
No, there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there is, and you know, obvious contrasting protest. What happened in Scottsdale was not a protest. That was rioting, looting, and just criminal behavior. What we've seen in Gilbert and the majority of other locations are peaceful protests and/or marches. To me, the difference between a protest and a march is protest, you're standing still, a march, you're doing both.
Got it.
But technically, you call it what you want. And our goal going into, and sorry I cut you off, I'm going to answer the question.
Go right ahead.
You're asking.
Yeah, you got it.
Our goal is anytime we find out that there's going to be a protest, and sometimes we have no idea, they just show up. But this is America. You have a right to protest, whether it's a tax levy or whether it's a racial or social injustice. Even COVID, we saw some protests regarding COVID and the restrictions, lack of or too much. And so in America, we're fundamental right is freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. And so as law enforcement officers, our goal is to ensure that we have a peaceful platform in which both sides can express their opinions peacefully. And so as you've seen in the majority of locations, Gilbert specifically, that was our goal, is to provide an opportunity for people to be heard, provide them with an opportunity to do so safely. And we had some counter protesters, if you will, that weren't happy and expressed their opinions, and that's normal with protests. And that's really the hardest issue for us as police officers is if it's just one-sided, usually people comply with the rules, and we make sure that they have a safe avenue to do that. But then when we have people countering that and antagonizing, it creates problems. And so we saw a little bit of that, but it was very short-lived. But on both sides, they both have a right to do that, as long as they're not committing any crimes or any violations or threatening. We encourage people to be heard and let their voices be heard. So as law enforcement, our role is obviously keep the peace, but then also we don't want to present an overbearing militaristic look. And so if you saw most of the pictures from Gilbert's protest, it was just in normal uniform, and we wanted the appearance of normal. Even through COVID, you know, we've been preaching the message of we want people to feel like they're safe, that the officers are still around, and it's a safe environment, whether you're staying at home or whether you're out getting groceries. And so the same thing with a protest or a march or a rally, we want to make sure that people feel that they're protected and safe to express their opinion. And if you have a differing opinion, we want to make sure that you have a place and time to do that as well. And so we had the opportunity to bring in the National Guard. They were available to us. We didn't feel we needed to do that. Part of it was that was because of the communication we had with the protesters, but also, you know, there's been some crazy nights where online people can say crazy things. We saw one again last night that was totally false about some shootings in Mesa that never happened, that were racially based, and it just never happened. So part of it, the intel is weeding out what's just lies and or people trying to antagonize people, and focusing on what's really happening and having boots on the ground to where our people can see what's really going on, making sure we keep control and keeping the peace. And so when we had our largest protest, I think it was on the 6th, on Saturday, we went out there, we met with them, we told them we were here to provide a safe environment, try to figure out what they want to do. And honestly, a lot of times it's dynamic, it changes. They may plan to stay and just walk up and down the sidewalks. And in this case, they decided to, they want to go to the police station. I told them it's 2 miles, that's fine. And they were a little hesitant, but I think once they got halfway, they realized it wasn't that bad. So they came down here and then went back. And then we've had several sporadic ones at the library, in some HOAs, down south, up north. We've had a lot of them. The only one, just so you know, that we've got planned right now that we know of is on the 26th of June at the library. I believe in the middle of the day, I think 2 or 3 o'clock. So a lot of times we know when there's going to be a protest, and we'll reach out to the organizer and just let them know we're here and we're available, and also to gauge how many people they anticipate so that we can determine what resources are needed to make sure everything stays safe.
Hey, Kathy, we
Yeah.
had a question that came up both in the chat as well as in the Q&A. Is now a good time to ask the question of Chief? Chief, essentially the question is, let's see, make sure that I get it here. What is the exact length of time it takes to become a Gilbert police officer? I know you addressed that briefly. The person goes on to say, training in some countries is years and some require higher education. Why doesn't the US or Arizona or Gilbert require more education and training?
Yep. So the basics, roughly the hiring process takes about 3 to 4 months from once you apply. Now it could be, we establish a list and you're on the list for a year. So it may be up to a year, but we obviously want to get our best candidates in as quickly as we can, because if not, somebody else is going to take them. Because most people aren't just, some do, some apply to just one location, but a lot of applicants, they'll test for 3 or 4 places. When I was getting into this, I was living in Utah and I was looking for better pay to do this. And so I tested in 4 different states, and whoever offered first, that's where I went, and ended up in Mesa, and now I'm here. So we have to move quickly and be competitive and try to get the best candidates as quickly as possible. Once you're hired, then depending on the academies, they're either 18 or 22 weeks, depending on which academy you go to. When we do our own academy in Gilbert in another year, ours will be about 22 weeks. We'll see if there's more that comes from the state that may be extended. It's up to us, though. There's actually, it's roughly 16 weeks is the state minimum standard. And so anything you can do on top of that, that's up to each agency and each academy. So our plan is to do more than that when we do our own starting next year. But it's roughly 6 months in the academy, and then you graduate and you come out to field training, and it's another 4 months. So it's roughly about 10 months total of training. And then once you're on your own and you're certified, and you're certified once you get done with the academy, but once you get done with the field training, then you're on your own as a solo officer. And from that point on, every quarter we do training. So some of it's state mandated that we are required to do every year, and some of it is training topics that we want our people to know and understand. As far as the education, that is set by the state on the minimum. We can obviously raise that. For our supervisors, we do require for sergeants an associate's degree. For lieutenants and above, it requires a bachelor's degree. Master's is not required, but preferred for our commanders and above, and most of us do have our masters. There's a couple that are just finishing theirs now. So there's been a lot of studies on whether that's beneficial or not. To me, I prefer those with bachelor's degrees or even an associate's, primarily because of the communication skills and the writing skills. For one, the social interaction that most people, it's changed a little bit with online schooling, but the interaction and the diversity that you see within a college setting, but also the writing skills. The majority of what we do, everything we do, we have to write about. So written communication and the ability to verbally communicate that to a judge or jury is extremely important. So the more education you have, the better candidate you have. And I'll find the stats real quick while you read another question on our demographics, but roughly, if I remember correctly, 48% of our officers have just a high school diploma, and so the other 52% have a associate's or higher. So we do actually have a high level of degrees. Just similarly, we're similar to our community. Our community has, the majority of our community have some type of higher education, and so we are reflective of that.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Chief. So Scottsdale experienced the riot that you mentioned before, and when that happened, it put the fear into a lot of our businesses. What's going to happen here? And then all of a sudden we heard there was a march, and there were a lot of people feeling very uneasy. Some people have boarded up their facilities. Others didn't know what to do. You know, even the chamber, we thought, uh-oh, do I need to go down there and get something out of the building just in case? You know, you never know. So how can businesses be kept apprised of what's going to happen?
Yeah, so that's a very difficult thing for us to answer, at least in a timely manner. So in those situations, you know, just like we've talked about in the past when I've spoke to the chamber about what preventative measures can you do within your business to make it less likely of a target. So let me address the intel side, then the safety side. Intel side, when those violent encounters happen, like we saw in Scottsdale, they had a warning. They knew that there was going to be a protest planned in front of the mall. They expected a couple hundred. But what they did not know at the time was it really wasn't a protest. It was a smash and grab. It was planned that way from the get-go. And there were some that came for a protest and realized that's not what this is. They immediately started smashing windows and causing problems. And those who were there to legitimately protest and have their voices heard left. But Scottsdale was not prepared for the large number. And I forget the numbers, but I know it's a big mall, but I want to say they said like 3.9 million square feet, counting the mall, the multi-levels, plus the parking garages, and over, I think, 25 or 30 entrances to the mall. So they were in a tactical disadvantage. They acknowledge, and we would have liked to seen a quicker and better response, but they were overwhelmed and they waited until all the other agencies arrived to help start to quell that. So, but that was an awakening, so to speak, for not only them, but all of us. From that day forward until just at the end of last week, we were having 100 people, 100, you know, that next day we had 125 people plus all of our patrol units just ready for a situation like that. So obviously our fear was we did not want, and nor did anyone else want to have that type of scenario replicated in our town. We quickly gathered that night when Scottsdale was happening. Myself and about 50 others came in to be prepared, because some of the intel we were getting was that they were going to leave Scottsdale, and we kept hearing go to Santan, go to Arizona Mills. And so we deployed our people there and watched and waited and feared for the worst and hoped for the best. And thankfully nothing bad happened that night. But then throughout that entire day, we started preparing, and all the other agencies started preparing for that worst case scenario. And so we had well over 100 people just set aside to make sure that that didn't happen. And then we were coordinated with each day. We had someone in Tempe for East Valley Emergency Operations Center to make sure that we were all prepared to assist and react if anyone had additional issues. And so a couple times we sent people to assist other agencies. Thankfully, we never had to request assistance for us. Plus, the National Guard started with a couple hundred and ended up about 1,200 troops that were available, but they cannot do that frontline skirmish lines, if you will, when it turns violent. They're just support and protection of facilities and businesses. And so, you know, our goal, we did get a lot of calls from businesses, specifically in Heritage, and when we would find out that a protest was planned, we did our best, and we probably didn't hit everybody, but we did our best to try to contact either in person or on phone. I know Dan went down and talked to numerous businesses, I think on Sunday, if I remember right, Dan, and just letting them know that we were here if they had questions. You know, our advice at that time, we didn't know what was going to come, so we left it up to each business. Our advice was take valuables out, board up windows if you felt comfortable doing with that. And, you know, the tragedy of it all was that everyone was just starting to open back up. So the time couldn't have been worse. But to the advantage too, some were still closed, so they just didn't reopen as planned. But as far as preparing your business to be safe so that it's not a target, we saw this just during COVID as well. of trying to remove your chairs and your furniture that are out in front of the patios, because a lot of what was used to break out windows were furniture and or items that were out on the patios to break out the windows and then start fires and loot. So on a preparation side, trying to make sure valuables aren't there, aren't available and or seen, and then making sure anything that could be used as either a weapon or a device to break out a window is not easily accessible. There's only so much you can do. And as law enforcement, our priority obviously is life over property, but we were intent on making sure that we didn't repeat in Gilbert what we saw in Scottsdale. But it's also, it depends on what you see. If I have 5,000 people show up at Heritage and they're intent on destroying the place, it's going to take us a while to get them out of there. So we will do everything we can to protect the people, but we also have to protect our officers and protect the firefighters that have to come in and help suppress any fires that are coming in as well. So it's a delicate situation, and we, like I said, as we get additional intel, we try to reach out to those businesses that are specifically in that location just to give them a heads up. A lot of times the protesters let them know as well. They've actually been really good in Gilbert of letting them know, hey, we're not here to cause problems. We're just here to express our opinions, and they've been welcomed. And some businesses have actually closed, and encourage their employees to be a part of it and peacefully have their voices heard to send a message as well. So we do our best, but we don't have a system set up to do alerts. And we get a lot of bad intel in the fact that for those that are trying to cause disruption, that is part of the plan, is to put out red herrings, so to speak, to where we're dedicating resources, chasing things down that never happened and don't exist.
So, Chief, I'm curious because I've heard that some business owners want to protect their property in some means. And I'm curious of your thoughts about the dangers of doing that, protecting your own property. And then how does the police know who the good guys and the bad guys are in a situation like that?
And that's probably the biggest problem. We don't. Now, obviously, if we know our business owners or we recognize people, or hopefully it's a calm situation where if there's a confrontation between two people, we have the ability to figure out who's doing what and who's in the right and who's in the wrong, or both sides. So it's a dangerous position. And if you watch the news, you saw some examples where businesses were successful in using the, whether it's security guards or armed business owners. But for just as many as I can say were successful, there were a handful that were killed. Whether it was security guards or the business owners, whether it's killed or beaten, you don't want to put yourself in a situation, whether you have insurance or not. Obviously, it's a lot of people are realizing they may not be covered for an incident like this with insurance. Some do, some don't. So that's something I would advise you to find out, where you stand, just like you would with flood or fire or any other type of insurance. But in a situation, you value your life, your businesses are your livelihood, and without them you would obviously struggle. But you have to risk reward, and don't put yourself in a situation where you become a target or get hurt or threatened because you're trying to protect your business. And it just depends on the crowd. It's hard to say what the right thing is and what the wrong thing, because some, when they saw that they were there to protect their business, they went on. They were looking for an easy target, and they didn't want to mess with somebody that was there to fight with them. And so they just went to the next easiest thing. And then tragically in other places, they just shot or killed the person and took their stuff anyway, or didn't even do anything, just killed them and moved on. So obviously that's a situation we don't want to happen to you or in our community. So our advice would be to not protect and or arm your business yourself. If you decide that is something you need to do through security and or surveillance, that would be my recommendation, is you hire someone who has the experience in doing so and knows when to evacuate, so to speak, or retreat, as opposed to getting a confrontation.
Well, I know we've been really blessed that all of our protests and marches have been very peaceful, and there's been no intention to do any property or people harm. So thank goodness for that. Um, um, I'm curious, I wanted to make sure that we have time for questions. And Dan, do we have anything right now?
So Kathy, one came in.
Okay.
And the question is, how many police officers does Gilbert have? And do you think that that is enough?
My selfish answer is it's never enough, but my realistic answer is we're in a good place. We have grown a lot. We currently, as of today, have 288 sworn officers. Once the budget that got approved last night goes into effect, we will be adding 13 more sworn police officers to those ranks. So we'll have 301 police officers as of July 1. And out of that 301, there's approximately 148 that are assigned just to patrol. So the rest are in myself, I'm included in that count. So our administrative staff, but the large majority of the remaining detectives are in criminal investigations. So roughly around 70 between the normal detectives that are following up on cases, everything from homicide to burglary, sex crimes and whatnot. But then we also have our detectives that are working drug cases and our SWAT team and whatnot. So the majority, just over roughly half are in patrol, and the rest are, and that's just officers. That doesn't count the sergeants. And so there's roughly, counting all the supervisors, 16 teams, you're looking at roughly about 175 that are designed and allocated to patrol, and the rest are support and follow-up and investigations.
Thanks, Chief. And I want to encourage everybody to type in your questions so we make sure we get to those. And Chief, I went through the Citizens Academy. And one of the statistics, I'm just curious if it's still valid, it was just a few months ago, but the #1 crime in Gilbert was burglary based on people not locking their doors. And so it's cars, I should say. Is that still right?
Yeah. So we run a weekly report, and whether you find this ironic or not, our top 5 calls consistently for the last 2-3 months have nothing to do with crime. It's burglary alarms, false alarms at residential or commercial, citizen assist, motor assist, civil disputes. A large majority of what we do as police officers isn't involving crime. Now that's dispatch calls for service. Somebody's calling for assistance. But on the criminal side, you are correct in the fact that our highest number of crimes in Gilbert are vehicle burglaries and thefts. So thefts being shoplifting as well. And then domestic violence and DUIs. Those are pretty much our top 4 and 5 crimes in Gilbert. Unfortunately, we've had 2 homicides in Gilbert. We average about 3 per year. Hopefully we can keep it at 2. We've made 3 arrests on one of those cases, and we're still investigating the other. So, we have violent crime here in Gilbert. Thankfully, not a lot. We do our best to keep that at a minimum. But to your point, and the point we make in the Citizens Police Academy, is that a lot of our crime is preventable. The majority of our people who commit vehicle burglaries, it's a crime spree. They do it quickly and they do it as easily as possible. And so if your doors are locked to your vehicle and your garage is closed, they're going to skip you and go to the next one. And so the majority of our vehicle burglaries are not forced entry. Those that are forced entry, they're seeing a laptop or a gun or something inside the car, and so they're breaking the window to grab it and run. But the majority of our burglaries are just opening doors, seeing what's in the glove box, and then moving on to the next one. So that's the best way to prevent crime, is to lock your stuff up each night and not leave your valuables out.
Thanks.
Yep.
Hey, Kathy, we have 2 additional questions. Is now a good time to ask the Chief the questions?
Yes, perfect.
Great. So the first question is, when is the new training facility going to be ready?
So it's making a lot of progress. The track will be, we're actually inspecting it next week. The state will come out and inspect it and make sure it will meet all their certifications, which we already know it will, but it's just part of the process. So the track will be done in July and turned over to us, and we'll actually start doing our first driver training the last week of July and the first week of August. And that is to do training for our instructors, and then from there we'll start using it. The rest of the facility will be done. Right now it's projected December 23rd, so it'll make a nice Christmas present for us. But no later than January of 21, it'll be up and running. So in the budget package last night were some additional positions to help us run that facility, a training lieutenant, some training officers. The way we've historically done training, both for PD and fire, has been to just pull people out of their normal jobs, whether it's a detective or a patrol officer, and they'll go teach a class and they come back. So obviously when they're gone, work doesn't get done. And so these additional positions that were approved last night will allow us to just focus on training, do more training, be more efficient. So we're very happy that that's coming to fruition, and thankfully for the community and their businesses support to get that approved. We are obviously watching. We were going to do a mini grand opening with the track opening up, but with COVID, we're going to delay that and just do one grand opening when it's done at the end of the year. So we'll make sure to get that information out to you. But by January, we'll be up and running.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Chief. A couple more questions. The next question is, what is the time standard Gilbert has to respond to an urgent 911 call?
So for an emergency, our goal is to be there. I want to say it's 3 minutes. Actually, I think it's 5. We're usually there, I think 2.3 minutes or less. So our goal is to get there obviously as quickly as possible. So for an emergency call, the national standard is roughly less than 5 minutes. And for us, we're averaging 2 minutes or less, if I remember correctly. I'd have to pull that up. But for every category of call, whether it's an emergency, a priority 1, 2, or 3, each one has a, not only for dispatch, they have a certain amount of time that they've got to dispatch that out. And it's basically 90 seconds or less for an emergency. And they usually get that dispatched out within 30 seconds. And then for us to respond, normally we are there in about 2 to 3 minutes. And that's part of our deployment plan, is making sure we have enough officers on the street, but they're not just all sitting at the station waiting for a call. They're proactively looking for issues and crimes and traffic issues. And so that when a emergency comes out, they can quickly respond and get there quite quickly. And everything from a crime to, an accident or someone who needs CPR, our goal is to be there as quickly as we can. A lot of times we beat fire just because there's less of them and there's at the station. And so that is something we're looking at, side topic, we're looking to get some defibrillators in all of our police cars, so that, quite often we do beat fire there by a minute or so. So the time is precious. And so we're looking to get some additional resources for officers to do some additional life-saving efforts. But we are well below what the national standard is. And I apologize, I don't have the exact number, but we're well below it in a good way.
Kathy, next question. Would you consider implementing something in the future like the Mayor of Phoenix is doing with the civilian oversight, or rather a civilian oversight board and/or an Office of Accountability and Transparency?
Yeah, so we have, I'll tell you what we currently have and then what we're looking to do. We currently have oversight. We do our investigations, but then for all critical incidents, we expand a little bit. Most just look at use of force. But we look at use of force, our collisions, our pursuits, obviously any serious injury or death, the use of our canines, anything that creates a liability or a concern. We have a critical incident review panel that reviews it. For the real minor stuff, somebody backs into a pole, or a minor use of force where we're just going hands-on, there's no injury, that is reviewed at the command level through the chain of command. But then for everything else, the serious injury or death, pursuits, and excessive force complaints, that is reviewed in conjunction with the police department. with our town attorneys, our safety managers, our department managers, our deputy town manager, myself, our assistant chiefs and commanders, and then all of our subject matter experts. So that's what we currently do. But obviously there's been a upswelling of and a push to get civilian oversight. There's some very good civilian oversight, and there's some very bad civilian oversight. So when done properly, it can provide that transparency and provide that security, if you will, from the community side to make sure that they know that we're doing things correctly and nothing's being swept underneath the rug. We're a very open department, and in the state of Arizona with our open records law, pretty much everything is available. So we are working on getting a lot of our stats and information out to the public. We have it. We run daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual reports on a lot of different topics and data sets. So we're working with, if you've seen our Town of Gilbert Alex open data portal, we're working on, we have our calls for service there now, but we're trying to get a lot of our information there, a combination of there and on our PD site. So if people want to see our demographics, what's the minority demographics of those that we give citations to or arrest, we have that information. So we're trying to do everything we can to be an open book, but between the mayor and management and myself, we will be discussing different options, some of which may be mandated by either federal or state standards. As we see, as I mentioned, there's a lot of legislation being proposed, so we will see what we're required to do and what we want to do and what the community wants us to do. And that's part of the listening sessions as well. What is it the community wants? But I'll kind of wrap up that topic. A lot of the calls for action and the demands for change, not only our department, but the majority of the departments in the East Valley, we've been operating under those standards for a good 10, 15, 20 years. We've never allowed the chokehold or the carotid control, which is the appropriate way of doing that control technique on the neck. A chokehold is designed to kill people, and that's why we don't allow it except for in a deadly force situation. So a lot of the one thing that we specifically don't have that they've asked for is that civilian oversight. We do have oversight. It's just not designed the way a lot of people have asked for it, but we're willing to consider that. And we're in the process of evaluating what those options would be. And we'll get more information once we determine which direction to go.
Thanks, Chief. I'm going to put a couple of shameless plugs out here. First, I mentioned that I was able to go through the Citizens Academy, and I would really encourage any resident of Gilbert to go through that, because it was eye-opening to see the level of services that the police department provides, and how they take care of their officers, how they prepare them to be out on the streets, but yet when times get really tough, you're taking care of their mental health as well as their physical health, and it was really encouraging. One of the really cool things was to go through the 911 setup there, and I know you're going to be expanding that a little bit, because to watch the calls come in and how they monitor those and just keep everything moving so smoothly was really amazing. And I think that anybody who has a chance to go through that should. If you don't have time to go through the whole Citizens Academy, Gilbert Leadership is recruiting right now, and we do have a public safety day where they do get introduced to some of the things that you all do. So either one of those opportunities is available.
Yeah, and so I encourage you to participate in those. Unfortunately, with COVID, we were about 5 weeks in, about halfway through with the spring session, and we had to cancel due to COVID. So we're hoping that we can get something going in the fall. If by chance we're still under restrictions, then we'll look to do something online and do what we can online. It was a unique experience this year for us, for Gilbert Leadership. We wanted to do the Public Safety Day, and we kept pushing it back, hoping we'd be back to normal. And we ended up doing a half-day quasi on-site and still online, and split everyone into groups of 8 so we could maintain our distancing. And But those are great opportunities, and thank you for bringing that up. And as Kathy had mentioned, she participates, and Sarah does as well, in our Chiefs Community Forum. If someone wants to participate in that, just email me. We try to be more topic driven, and when we do our coffee with a cop or pizza with a cop or our open houses, that's where, you know, we're open to different dialogues and questions. A great opportunity to see what type of equipment we use, and ask questions, good or bad, and let us know what's going on. But these community forums are designed to talk about the issues like we're talking about today. You know, what is our policy, from everything from pursuits to use of force to recruiting and community engagement? What are we doing to make sure we're involving the community? And so we've been very, very heavily focused on community engagement and making sure that that continues. And, you know, unfortunately, that it takes times like this to get people that normally wouldn't come to meetings like that to come to our meetings, but we welcome people. We understand they're busy, and we understand why they can't always be there, but we're more than willing to open that up to a wider audience. And through the town and through myself and the police department, we'll continue to provide those opportunities for additional involvement, and to be heard and be part of a solution.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna close out our session today. I didn't see any more questions. Dan, I don't think you have any, do you? Oh, there's one that came up. Go ahead.
The one that just came up, what kind of training does Gilbert PD require to avoid racial bias and inequity, or rather inequality, especially since most of Gilbert's officers are white males?
Yep. So in the academy, we have, it changes names, but it used to be cultural diversity back in the day. But diversity training, cultural diversity training, implicit bias, they're a core foundation that they get in the academy, and then from that it's up to each department of what they do. So my goal has been to try to do something at least every other year. It's difficult with all of our training that we have to do, and that is a very important class, and it's something that I want to make sure we get the right instructors and the right people, so that it is presented in a very professional, and we don't want to just check a box. We want to make sure they're actually learning stuff in the class. And so we've done several of those, and we're looking to do some more as well. And in addition to the training and in our policy, we have a policy that prohibits, you know, discrimination, obviously, and bias-based policing of pulling people over because they're this or that, or they aren't this or that. And really focusing in, making sure that we're following our policies, following the law, reinforcing that with not only training and policy, but then practice as well. If somebody violates any of those principles, that we're investigating it, enforcing compliance with our not only our statutes, but our policies and our training. And if someone is not compliant with that, making sure that they're no longer with us. So we take great pride in the fact that we believe that we provide an unbiased police department and police officers, but we also know that we can't assume that we're doing that. We've got to make sure that we're doing every step possible between the oversight, the training, and the policy to make sure that's happening. So it's not just on paper, it's actually in practice as well. And so, you know, if you or someone else sees something that you believe may be racially biased, then I encourage you to let me know, and we will investigate it, and we will take the appropriate action. And so I've seen a lot of stuff online where there's stories that have been told, and sometimes it's hard to tell, is it Gilbert, is it somebody else? And I've contacted a lot of people that have been posting those, and a couple have been in Gilbert and a couple have not been in Gilbert, and in fact some have not even been in our state. But that's the power of social media. But I want to make sure that people know that don't just complain about a problem, do something and let us know that there's a problem, and we will investigate it and get to the heart of what happened.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today. Dan, did you have something you wanted to say?
Kathy, I just wanted to Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be with you and the audience today, Chief. Fantastic job addressing all the questions, and you've always been just a class act in addressing these kind of issues and situations. And we not only appreciate you, but Kathy, appreciate you and the chamber for bringing this discussion to the community. So thank you.
Thank you. And Dan, thanks for your partnership in this. We're going to continue calls like this in the future, and you'll be getting more information. And Chief, I just can't thank you enough for your service. Everyone who works with you, I know how dedicated they are to our community and providing the best service that we can have. A shout out to our residents as well. We're not the #2 safest community without amazing residents who are providing you the input that you need to keep us safe. But every day, you know, I really realized it more when I went through the academy, how every day you and your officers are putting their lives on the line for us, because there's so many unknowns out there. And, you know, on behalf of the chamber and the whole community, thank you for that.
We appreciate it. And I know some probably in the audience and a lot of the business owners, we get a lot of everything from a thank you to, I haven't had to buy a meal for our officers for a while. When we were having the protests and through COVID, we've had numerous donations, and we funnel that through the nonprofit or Citizen Police Academy Alumni Association, so keep our hands clean. But the outpouring of support throughout this year, it's been a crazy year. But the community support, the business support, we really appreciate everything you guys have done, and thank you from everything from the kind words, the emails, the phone calls, the food support for our people that are working every day. We really appreciate it.
Great. All right, with that, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you so much. I know the chief is available. He's really good about giving out his information, and we'll get back to you right away. So thanks again for joining us today, and we'll be sending out information about our next call. Dan, thanks, and Chief, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Appreciate
Okay.
it.
Bye, everybody.